Hey there, fellow English explorers. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today, we're going to tackle British and American English. Two sides of the same coin, but with some fascinating differences, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Like two siblings who grew up in different houses, they share the same DNA but developed unique personalities.
Exactly. We'll be exploring those unique personalities, the vocabulary variations, those pronunciation quirks, and even how culture has shaped the way Brits and Americans use the language.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for the English language.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so let's decode, shall we? Let's start with the words themselves. Imagine you're craving those crispy fried potato things.
Mm-hmm.
In America, you'd order fries, right?
Yeah. Right.
But hop across the pond, and suddenly you're asking for chips.
And what Americans call chips, the British call crisps. A real linguistic switcheroo.
It is. And these differences go way beyond snacks.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the front of your car. In Britain, it's the bonnet. In America, it's the hood.
And navigating a busy intersection. You might encounter a roundabout in Britain, but in America, it's a traffic circle.
It's like a fun game of spot the difference with words. And sometimes the differences are super subtle. Take jaywalking. In America, it's a big no-no. Crossing the road illegally or carelessly.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that in the States.
But in Britain, it's not nearly as much of a thing.
Reflects different attitudes towards pedestrians, you know?
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to something we can all relate to. Food. You're craving a sweet baked treat. In Britain, you'd grab a biscuit.
But in America, it's a cookie.
Exactly. And it's not just snacks. Think about dessert. Pudding in the UK can be any sweet treat after a meal. But in America, pudding usually means that creamy, custard-like dessert.
So many potential mix-ups, right?
Totally. Imagine dining out and you're ready to pay. In Britain, you ask for the bill. But in America, it's the check.
And if you want your food to go, you'd ask for takeaway in Britain, but takeout in America.
Language adapting to different social situations.
Wow.
Fascinating. It is. And we've got more. Sweets in Britain are candy in America.
And jelly can be either a wobbly dessert or a fruit spread, depending on which side of the pond you're on.
Right. So many variations. Okay, picture this. It's nighttime, and you need some light. In Britain, you grab a torch.
But in America, it's a flashlight.
You throw something away. In Britain, you use the dustbin. In America, it's the trash can.
Yeah.
Even washing the dishes has different terms.
Washing up liquid versus dish soap.
Exactly. And what about where you live? You'd look for a flat in London, but an apartment in New York.
And you'd consult an estate agent in Britain, but a real estate agent in America.
So many differences. It's almost like they're speaking different languages, right?
Almost. But here's something interesting. Words like loo for the toilet and kettle to boil water, common in Britain, aren't as prevalent in American homes. I wonder why that is.
Great question. Maybe it's because of different cultural habits or the popularity of coffee makers over kettles in America.
Could be.
But before we dive into cultural nuances, how about a quick vocabulary quiz? Ready?
Hit me with it.
All right. Is a dummy a British or American term? What about a bum bag?
Tricky.
And would you have a barbecue in your garden or your yard? Think carefully, folks. These words might sound familiar, but their meanings can be quite different. Remember, media and pop culture often play a role in shaping our perceptions of these differences.
Sometimes even exaggerating them for comedic effect.
Exactly. But they also help keep these fascinating variations alive and well. Okay, ready for the answers?
Let's hear them.
A dummy is the British term for what Americans call a pacifier.
That makes sense.
And that bum bag that might raise a few eyebrows in America is a fanny pack across the pond.
Okay, I see where the confusion might come in.
Finally, it's a garden in Britain for those barbecues, but a yard in America. How'd you do? Feeling chuffed?
You bet. But hey, listeners, if you're feeling a little lost, don't worry. That's just a British term for feeling pleased.
Now that our ears are tuned to vocabulary, let's move on to pronunciation. Get ready to be amazed at how much it can vary, even for simple words.
It's true. Pronunciation is like the music of language. It gives each variety its unique rhythm and flow.
I love that. Okay, so the word dance. A British speaker would say dance with that lovely open A sound.
But an American would say dancey with a flatter A. Subtle, but it makes a difference.
And how about bath? British. Bath with a broad A. American. Bath with a shorter A.
Instantly tells you where someone's from, right?
It does. And this broad A versus short A thing happens in lots of words like glass, class, and path.
like a linguistic fingerprint.
Mhm.
And then there are stress patterns where the emphasis falls in a word, like advertisement. British English stresses the second syllable, advertisement.
But American English stresses the first. Advertisement. Same with laboratory.
Laboratory versus laboratory. Subtle, but it changes the rhythm of the word.
It does. And then there's the R sound, or rhoticity. Americans pronounce the R at the end of syllables, while British speakers often soften it or drop it. Think car and hard.
One of the biggest giveaways.
Totally. Now let's talk about words with particularly distinct pronunciations, like schedule, British, edule, American, schedule,
Big difference.
right? And aluminum, British, aluminum, American, aluminum.
And don't forget herb. British speakers pronounce the H, but Americans often drop it.
So many examples. Okay, ready for a little pronunciation practice? Try saying these words in both a British and an American accent. Tomato, leisure, and garage.
Give it a go, listeners. Have some fun with it.
While you're at it, remember how actors have to switch between accents for roles? Like Hugh Laurie in House, a Brit who nailed an American accent.
And Renee Zellweger, an American who mastered a British accent for Bridget Jones's Diary.
Amazing. It really is. Shows the power of language and how it can transport us. Okay, time for the pronunciation reveals. Tomato in British English is to MH2 with that beautiful round A. In American English, it's to May 2 with a flatter A.
And leisure, British, L-E-Z-H, American, easier. Finally, garage is garage in British English, but G-R-H-Z-H in American English.
How'd you do? Fun to play around with those sounds, right?
Definitely. But as we've been saying, language is more than just words and sounds. It's also about culture.
Right. We often hear that British English is more formal or polite, like using would you mind instead of the American can you.
Absolutely. And think about idiomatic expressions, those little phrases that add color to language. In Britain, you might hear cheers as a casual thank you or fancy a cuppa as an invitation for tea.
In America, it's more likely to be have a good one as a farewell. Each culture has its own set of linguistic tools, and those cultural differences extend to things like public etiquette.
Like the British love of queuing or lining up patiently, and their tendency to avoid confrontation in public.
Americans, on the other hand, are known for being more direct. Even small talk can be different. Americans have that casual, how are you greeting, not always expecting a detailed answer.
Whereas British small talk tends to be more reserved, often focusing on safe topics like the weather, more about polite acknowledgement than deep personal sharing.
Fascinating how even small talk reveals cultural differences. And of course, we can't forget about the influence of media. American pop culture has globalized words like awesome and cool.
True. But British media has also had its impact. Shows like Doctor Who and The Great British Bake Off have introduced words like brilliant and fancy that to a global audience.
The power of entertainment. But hey, how about we lighten things up with some fun trivia? Ready for a challenge?
Always.
Okay, did you know that despite its smaller size, the UK actually has more regional accents than the US?
It's true. Amazing diversity packed into those islands.
And speaking of accents, both the UK and the US have what are often considered standard accents. In Britain, it's the Queen's English, also known as received pronunciation. In the US, it's General American.
These are considered neutral accents often used in broadcasting and formal settings.
Okay, enough trivia. Time for the ultimate test. We'll give you a word or phrase and you decide. British or American? Ready? First up, knackered.
Knackered.
Next, knock on wood versus touch wood. Which one is American and which one is British? Think about those superstitious rituals.
Love those.
Okay, next up, I'm chuffed.
This one sounds tricky.
And lastly, I could care less.
This one always sparks debate about grammar.
It does. Okay, answers time. Knackered is a British term for being exhausted.
Makes sense.
Knock on wood is American, while touch wood is British.
Both warding off bad luck.
Next, I'm chuffed is definitely British. It means I'm pleased or happy.
And lastly, I could care less is considered American, though couldn't care less might make more sense grammatically.
Great job, everyone. Hopefully you're feeling chuffed about your performance.
And remember, keep exploring these linguistic differences. You never know what you'll discover. Back again, word detectives, ready to dig deeper into British and American English.
Absolutely. In part 1, we unearthed those vocabulary and pronunciation quirks. Now I'm fascinated by how culture shapes the language and vice versa.
Right. It's like the secret ingredient that gives each variety its unique flavor.
Exactly. We touched on how British English can seem more formal, using would you mind and all that, but there's so much more to explore.
Oh, tons. Like those colorful British idioms. Bob's your uncle, for example.
Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. It means something's easy or straightforward, like just follow these instructions and Bob's your uncle. You'll have a perfectly baked cake.
Okay, I kind of love that.
Uh-huh.
What other British idioms might confuse Americans?
How about chuffed to bits?
Chuffed to bits.
Means incredibly pleased or delighted. Way more expressive than just saying happy, right?
It is, and they reflect cultural values, too, like the British emphasis on politeness, please, and thank you everywhere, even in casual settings.
Whereas Americans might be more likely to say, no problem, or you bet.
Exactly. Little things that reveal a lot about cultural norms. Okay, let's talk humor. British humor, dry, sarcastic. American humor, more boisterous, slapstick.
A classic contrast. British comedy, it's all about wordplay, subtle irony. You might not even get the joke until later. American comedy. More physical humor, over-the-top characters, big, loud laughs.
Different styles, different ways of seeing the world, reflected in their humor.
Totally. Humor's always evolving, too, shaped by current events, trends, even technology.
And speaking of evolving, let's talk slang. Slang is like that rebellious teenager of language, always changing, pushing boundaries.
It's all about identity, connecting with your tribe, maybe even challenging the status quo.
So what British slang might baffle Americans?
Skint, for example, means broke,
Yeah.
out of money.
Skint, okay?
And if someone's feeling rough, they're not talking about a rough surface. They're feeling ill, maybe hungover.
I love how descriptive slang can be. It adds so much color and authenticity.
It does, and it's constantly changing, new words popping up all the time. Social media, music, they play a huge role.
So how does a slang word go from underground to mainstream?
It often starts within a specific community, then spreads like wildfire through social media, music, pop culture. Think about catchphrases from movies, suddenly everyone's saying them.
It's true. Once it hits the mainstream, the meaning might even shift over time. Language never sits still.
Exactly. It's dynamic, always adapting.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to study. Okay, let's switch gears and look at the historical influences that shaped British and American English. Both came from Old English, but how do they become so distinct?
Well, American English was heavily influenced by immigrants, all those different languages and dialects coming together, a real melting pot.
A reflection of America's diverse heritage.
Exactly. It's a language built on embracing new words, new influences, always evolving.
That's incredible. What about British English? What shaped its development?
Well, think about all the contact British English has had with other European languages, especially French and Latin. The Norman Conquest in 1066, that was huge. It introduced a ton of French words and phrases that are still used today.
Wow, so English is a product of centuries of linguistic exchange.
It is, and that's what makes it so rich and complex, full of layers and connections.
Okay, let's get specific. How did historical events shape vocabulary and pronunciation? I need some aha moments.
Okay, how about this? The word fall in American English. For autumn, right. Well, it came from the Old English phrase, fall of the leaf.
Makes total sense. So why does the British say autumn?
Autumn comes from French and Latin influences on English. Centuries of cultural exchange leave their mark on language.
It's amazing how those influences are still present in everyday speech, like little time capsules.
Exactly. It reminds us that language isn't static, it's a living thing, constantly adapting.
So how's that adaptation happening today? What's shaping the future of British and American English?
Globalization, more travel, more communication, more media from all over. British and American English are constantly bumping into each other, influencing each other.
Think about streaming services. British TV and movies are hugely popular worldwide. People are exposed to different accents, slang, cultural references, all through entertainment.
It's true. And it leads to some convergence, some words and phrases becoming more universal, but it also reinforces the unique identities of each variety.
It's like a global dance, blending and separating, creating something new and dynamic.
Love that. And the dance is only going to get more intricate as technology connects us even more. But hey, let's take a breather for now. Our brains could probably use a rest.
Definitely. When we come back, we'll wrap up this deep dive with some fun trivia and a final quiz to test your knowledge of British and American English. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, language lovers. Time for the grand finale of our British and American English deep dive.
I'm ready. Got some fun trivia, and maybe even a few linguistic curveballs to throw your way.
Perfect. Okay, first question. Which country has more regional dialects? The massive U.S. or the relatively small U.K.?
It might surprise you, but the UK wins that one. Despite its size, it's got an incredible range of regional accents. From the Scottish Highlands to London's East End, it's a dialect paradise.
Amazing. Such diversity in such a compact space.
It shows you how language can evolve differently even within a small area, influenced by history, geography, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about those standard accents. In Britain, it's received pronunciation, also called the Queen's English. In the U.S., it's General American.
Right. These are often seen as neutral accents without strong regional markers. They're commonly used in broadcasting, formal settings, that kind of thing.
Makes sense. It's like having a common ground for communication, even with all the regional variations out there.
Exactly. But hey, enough trivia for now. Let's get to the fun part. Ready for a rapid-fire quiz? British or American? You decide.
Bring it on.
Okay, first up. Take the piss. What do you think?
Take the piss. Sounds a bit cheeky.
It does, doesn't it? All right, next one. Gutted. British or American?
Gutted. That one sounds pretty intense.
It does. Okay, how about fit? But we're talking about using it to describe someone's appearance.
Fit. How interesting. All right, last one, and this one's a classic. Pants.
Ah, yes, pants. Guaranteed to cause some confusion. Think carefully about what pants means to you. It might not be the same across the pond.
Okay, time for the answers. Take the piss is definitely British. It means to tease or make fun of someone, usually in a lighthearted way.
Right. Don't be surprised if you hear it in a British pub. You might even be the target. But don't worry, it's usually all in good fun.
Next up, gutted is also British. It means feeling super disappointed, like really down in the dumps.
It's a strong word, really captures that feeling of emotional devastation. British English can be very expressive like that.
It can. Now for fit, when used to describe someone's looks, it's British slang for attractive.
Right. Like saying someone's good looking, but in a more casual way.
And finally, the big one, pants. In American English, it means trousers. But in British English, it means underwear.
Oh yeah, this one can lead to some hilarious mix-ups if you're not careful. Imagine asking someone to pass you your pants at dinner and they hand you your underwear.
Talk about an awkward moment. It shows how important it is to be aware of these differences, especially when traveling or communicating with people from different cultures.
Absolutely. Language and culture go hand in hand.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into British and American English. We've covered a lot of ground, from vocabulary and pronunciation to those fascinating cultural influences.
It's been a blast exploring these two sides of the same language. They might share roots, but they each have their own unique personality and charm.
Exactly. Hopefully this deep dive has inspired you to keep learning, keep exploring the amazing world of English. Because remember, language is always changing, always evolving. So keep your ears open, embrace those differences, and keep having fun with words.
Well said. And that's a wrap for this episode, folks.
Thanks for joining us on this linguistic adventure.